Oh, thank you so much for coming to this podcast. Cool. We're very excited to help launch the release of Breathtaking by Jessica Fein. Congratulations. He's here in conversation with Linda Sivertsen.
You got it.
I gave her the heads up already that I was probably going to.
Everybody does.
But anyway, very excited to have you all tonight. We'll do about a 30-minute conversation between the two of you, open it up to Q&A, and then we have lots of books to buy and sign. So take it away. Enjoy.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jess. I can't believe we're here.
I know, this is amazing.
How many years ago did this
2020
start? 2020
is when we met.
Jessica and I met together in Carmel. You came to work on a book, and you know, I never know when I'm working with a client if their book will realize, because I can see a vision for somebody and I can get really excited about somebody's book. And just because I see it doesn't mean that they can hold it, right? If somebody has, who here wants to write a book? Anybody have a dream? So when somebody has a dream to write a book, it can take over, and it can just be the most overwhelmingly exciting thing, almost like having an affair or, you know, taking on a lover, right? And so they come to me and they're so excited. They're so excited. And I get all swept up in the vision, and sometimes I fall in love with the vision as much as they do. But then they leave and life happens, and life happened for you in the most unbelievably heroic way. And I don't always know if the vision that we had together that was so magical will manifest. And sometimes it doesn't need to, right? Sometimes it's just the dream. And you did it. You did it despite a pandemic. You did it despite having other children. You did it despite working full time. Your husband, Rob, where are you? Rob, working full time. You did it, in spite of having a daughter who had a rare disease, which I'll have you talk about. And then, watching her degenerate to the point of no longer being with us. And yet she still carried the dream and the vision. So I would like you to explain to them what Dahlia was dealing with, what you dealt with, briefly as a family, and then we'll start the conversation. But I'm just so happy.
Well, I have to start off by saying, for people who don't know, Linda is the book mama, is what she is known as. And Linda really helped birth this book by our experience together in Carmel at a retreat that I somehow decided to sign up for, and to go from Boston to Carmel. And I sold a piano in order to have the money to
I don't think you told me you sold a piano.
Sold a piano. I was
I'm
I'm
so
going.
sorry.
And I don't play piano, so that sounds like a pretty good deal. And it was really a magical experience. Linda, you believed in the book, and so that meant so much to me, and really made me feel like, yeah, this could happen. And one of the things that really stuck with me, so this is an amazing retreat, and there were 5 of us, and we read parts of our book, and then we work on it, and we meet with Linda individually. And Linda at one point said to me, this book is a love story. And I was like, what? I didn't know that.
You really didn't?
I didn't know that. And I think you might have even said it's a love letter to Rob, which was interesting. He's going to walk out. He's already been called out twice tonight. This is not his thing. But you said it's a love story, and that always stuck with me. And for people who have read it, and hopefully for people who are going to be reading it, that's actually now the front matter of the book, is to say that right up front, because that's what it is. And so the story is one of, in the broadest sense, how we need to constantly reimagine what our life is going to be. We have this idea. And in our case, it was, well, we're going to get married. We were together 10 years. And by the time we got married, we were like, okay, now we're going to, start our family. And as we learned over the course of many, many years, is that's not how it works. And we had to reimagine, as first, we took a very unexpected and circuitous path to becoming parents, with 5 years of fertility treatments, and ending up in Guatemala, where we were clearly meant to be all along. Unfortunately, we had to go through these 5 years to get there. And we adopted 3 children from Guatemala. When our middle child, Dahlia, was 5, she was diagnosed with an ultra-rare degenerative mitochondrial disease called Murph syndrome. And yet again, we had to think about what that meant and what our life was going to be. my decision at that point was that I would cure mitochondrial disease. Now,
Of
to
course.
be clear,
No bigs.
no bigs, especially because I was like, wait, what are mitochondria? Like, I had no idea. And for, many of you, I don't know, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a researcher. I sold a piano, so clearly I don't have millions of dollars to cure this.
Yeah.
And what happened was it's a progressive disease, and we learned quite a bit and became, in fact, the experts in this disease. And the doctors would come to us to understand things about what was happening to our daughter. And when she was 9, she became very sick and lost the ability to walk and to talk and to eat and to breathe without a ventilator. So for the next 8 years, until she was 17, Dahlia died 2 years ago, 1 week after her 17th birthday. We had, yet again, a very different life than we had imagined. And that life kept presenting itself anew to us as Dahlia's disease progressed. And at some point along the way, I discovered that, lo and behold, I wasn't going to cure mitochondrial disease. But that was really an eye-opening transition for me, as I realized, like I said, we don't have control. So what can we control, and how do we create a life of joy and meaning in the context of so much loss and uncertainty, which is something that every one of us is dealing with to a certain extent. And maybe not to this extent, but, we don't have control. And I watched Dahlia and learned from Dahlia. And as she lost more functionality, she was an eyes-on patient, which meant that Rob or myself or a nurse trained specifically in her care had to have our eyes on her 24/7.
And yet the caregivers would fall asleep. I mean, there were
some
litany
gorgeous caregivers who became part of our family. And there were a lot of not gorgeous caregivers.
But even the gorgeous ones could fall asleep because it's in the middle of the night. Life happens.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and so that is kind of a very broad brushstroke of what the book is about, and a lot of other losses punctuating this time period.
And yet somehow the book is so enjoyable. It's light and bright and beautiful and life affirming. I don't know how you did it. I mean, I saw you doing it, but I don't know how she did it to make such a devastating story so beautiful and enjoyable.
Well, thank you. And that's so gratifying for me when people have said, like, I was laughing. I didn't expect
I totally
to laugh,
laughed,
and I was like, great.
Yeah.
But, that was Dahlia. That was Dahlia who, how did she, find this ability to smile and to laugh and to have joy if anybody had a reason to be angry and devastated and afraid, And so that was kind of the give and take.
One of the things that really struck me about the book, it's one thing for the parents to say, oh, but she had such a bright light and everybody loved her. That's one thing to say that. But the way you show, like you go to the school and the kids can't wait to hold her hand and they run to her wheelchair. And that's where I was just, I felt her presence, and I could just feel her joy of living. She could no longer eat, but she went to cooking class and couldn't wait to cook, to bring them cookies. Like, just her spirit is just incredible. And you've really done a great job of bringing it into the book. And then I think anybody who's got a kid, a child, or anybody who's suffering, I think the book will bring so much joy and kind of peace.
Thank you.
Because as you guys kept navigating the trauma, you kept having to find pockets of peace, and you kept having to find joy in the unenjoyable, and you somehow did it over and over and over. And one of the things that I really took away from the book is I've never been a traveler. I'm a total homebody. I hate leaving the house. But I do, because you have to move around in life. But I just don't like plan vacations. Y'all just keep planning vacations, and you keep showing the children that like life doesn't stop because things are hard. You bring the hard with you and enjoy the ride. And I took a lot away from that.
Well, thank you. And that was such a decision that we had to make, because clearly we could have never left the house.
Never.
Right. It was not easy. And
it took you a half an hour.
Oh, at least.
Just gathering the things to leave the house.
The stuff and and so why did we do that? Right. And that was a decision that, again, we watched Dahlia, and it wasn't only Dahlia. We had other children, and
That was
they all
key.
deserved a childhood.
That was key.
Right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things, I said a moment ago that I was planning to cure mitochondrial disease. And, that takes a lot of time
To cure?
to cure mitochondrial
Oh,
disease.
this is my favorite scene. I know where you're going. I love this.
Well, but one of the things that I realized is that all this time and energy that I'm spending kind of over here trying to get us into the study and trying to.
That one's having fun.
Yeah, Rob. Rob is with Dahlia and in these moments and being present and curled up reading and having water fights with the saline bullets that are meant to unclog the plugs in a trach. And these things and being so present and just goofing around. And I was kind of missing out by being over here trying to do something that was undoable.
Oh
really,
my God. That's
So.
Will you read that piece about the dog?
Yes.
Please?
Well, it is so funny. And so I have to say, Linda was once upon a time a professional dog walker.
Yeah.
Dog walker to the stars.
Here in Los Angeles.
Yes.
Best job ever. My sister then took it over. Liz, next to my sister, is a dog psychic, a pet psychic.
I mean, there's so much.
So this is like dog city
Linda
over. I have
chose-
8 dogs now.
And
Yeah.
Linda chose this little piece for me to read tonight. And what she didn't know when she chose it is that the secondary star of this scene, the first star is our dog, but the secondary star is here, which is our Jen.
That is amazing. I'm
Right?
so happy.
So the setup for this is that we were in the pediatric intensive care unit for 3 months, and it was hard. And once a week, there was pet therapy. And this was Dahlia's favorite time of the week because the dog would come and jump up, the volunteers who would come with the dogs, the whole thing was a little bit of magic. And Dahlia loved it and was begging us when I want one, she would say.
Oh my God.
And we're like, okay. I mean, we would have done anything. When we get home, we will get you a dog. And one night curled up on this like hard pseudo bed in the ICU, I called Jen in LA, in Boston. And I was like, Dahlia wants a dog. We need to get Dahlia a dog. How do we do that? Well, the next day, Jen takes the day off of work and here in LA starts going around and shopping the shelters or whatever you do.
Really?
Yes, to find us a dog. And fast forward, flies to Boston with the dog and gives him to Dahlia and gets back on a plane and off she goes. So this is just a short passage where we have the dog, and I think it's like the first day, it's summer and it's like 1,000 degrees in Boston and we're out on a walk and we didn't bring water because we're not dog people. We didn't know what we were doing. And so we pick up Blackie O, that's our dog, and we put him on Dahlia's lap in the wheelchair.
What kind of a dog is he?
He's a mix. So he's a poodle-ish dog.
How big?
know.
Like
He's
45?
teeny tiny. He's like
Oh,
17 pounds.
that's
He's
right,
not
that's
really
right.
even
Okay.
a dog. He's
Okay.
like some magical spiritual
But on
thing
her
that's here.
wheelchair, he looks substantial.
Yeah,
Okay,
he's
okay.
teeny.
Okay.
He's teeny, and he would ride. And sometimes, there was a foot thing. So sometimes he'd just be there on the foot thing. I have video. Anybody who's interested, I'll follow up. But anyway, once he rode on Dahlia's lap, he just decided he was hers, and that was what it was going to be. So that's where I'll start off. After that, Blackie O decided he was Dahlia's dog. He'd be nice enough to the rest of us, but Dahlia was his person. He started sleeping at the end of Dahlia's bed. He walked right next to the wheelchair when he wasn't sitting on her lap, and he barked at any stranger who came too close. When Dahlia left the house for the day, Blackie O watched for her out the window next to the front door until she returned. When the boys came home, Blackie O barely lifted his head. When Rob and I came through the door, he ignored us altogether. But as soon as he heard Dahlia's van pull into the driveway, he leapt up and started thwapping his tail so vigorously, I worried it might fly off. When Dahlia came through the front door, he stood on his back legs and rested his front ones on the side of her chair. He was so protective of her, as though he knew she needed special protecting. He essentially trained himself to become Dahlia's service dog. We began to take him with us everywhere we went with Dahlia and quickly learned that nobody would question the fact that we had a dog with us, even in a no dogs allowed setting, if he were sitting on Dahlia's lap. Instead, people said how adorable he was. Other kids gathered around and asked if they could pet him. Dahlia became the center of attention, not because she had a tube coming out of her neck or was in a wheelchair, but because she had the cutest dog in town. When the other kids ran outside, Blackie O sat right by Dahlia's side watching. When they played baseball or rode bikes, He sat on Dahlia's lap and licked her hand. Everybody else looked for Dahlia to fit into their world, but Blackie O took his place right beside Dahlia in hers. How does Blackie O know Dahlia needs extra love? Theo asked me one day. Dogs just know, I answered, but really I had no idea. Dahlia was the only one in the family who never fed Blackie O, the only one who couldn't throw the ball for him or rub his belly in the place that made his tail wag. I once read that dogs can read human emotion, so maybe he could tell how full of sweetness she was, even though it was increasingly hard for her to show it. Maybe he stuck by her side not because she needed love, but because she personified it.
Yeah. So how do you feel now that you've put this beautiful story out in the world? Obviously, you have the grief, you've lost your daughter, but you have this story that's now beautifully touching the world. How does that feel?
I feel so, it's hard to come up with a word because you don't want to say like overjoyed or delighted or any of those things, but it's so meaningful to me to have a book which actually gives me an excuse to talk about my daughter.
Oh, sure.
And when people say to me, I really feel like I know Dahlia now.
Yeah.
That is so meaningful to me. And it's not just Dahlia. There are a lot of characters in the book who are not here with us physically now. A lot of loss.
Your sisters,
My
Rachel,
2 sisters,
Naomi,
yes,
dad,
and my
your
parents. Yeah, a lot of loss. And so to be able to share the stories and to introduce my people to other people and for people to say, oh my God, I feel like I knew them. That means everything to me.
Tell them briefly about your father. Her father, I did not know this, even though I've known Jessica for a couple of years now. I had no idea until I was researching for this. Your father was an insanely beautiful writer.
Okay, he was
published writer,
an amazing writer.
Amazing.
Some people here know, and so yes, that is why it's always been a little bit like I don't know if I can really claim the fact that I'm a writer because like that's a real writer. That's somebody who was like a gifted musician who used words as his music. I mean, just like the way that he was able to tell a story, and it was really something. And what's kind of just, I don't know, in this weird way that life works, he actually wrote a book about the loss of my sister. That loss kicks off this book. So I will share with you, and I don't know if you know this, but he left a note to be read after he died.
I did not know that.
Yeah. And at the end of it, he says, I'd have liked to know how the story ended, but the truth is the story never ends. All that changes is who gets to write it. I hand my pen to you.
No, geez.
Write well.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So that was my charge. So there you go. What are you going to do?
Do you ever feel when you're writing, because I often feel like this when I'm writing, and I know people here also feel this way. Do you ever feel like they're writing through you?
You know, it's really interesting that you asked that as we're talking about my dad, because he would tell me that there were times when he would sit and be writing for hours and get up and have no idea what he had written.
Yeah.
That hasn't happened for me, unfortunately. But sometimes when I feel like, ooh, that's a good sentence, I do feel like I had a little bit of help.
Yeah. You write in the book about the difference of living in fear versus living with fear.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? Because I think we're all afraid a lot more lately than we ever have been, and are having to learn, how do you live with fear?
Yes. And so, you know, living in fear means, and I feel like during COVID, a lot of people lived in fear for the first time. And for us, COVID was like, welcome. Like,
oh my God.
You guys all get it now. This is what we've been living, right?
Oh, geez.
You know? And so the idea is that if you're living in fear, essentially you're consumed by it, right? You are consumed by fear. So now that takes a lot of energy, right? You've got to spend all of your time thinking about the fear and tending to the fear and having the fear surround you so that things bounce off of it. It doesn't work. Instead, you can live with fear. And I think this is very much the case for any kind of major thing that we're dealing with. You live with it. It's not going away, right? So you invite it in. Okay, fear, I know you're here and we're going to be here together. And you're not driving because I'm going to be the one driving the car, but you can be there sitting in the passenger seat. I know you're here. You know, you don't have too much control and you live with it. And I think that in grief now, that's something that I have really come to understand. And look, sometimes more so than others, and it's evolving. But this idea that we're not going to get through it, we're not going to get over it, we're going to live with it. It's going to be here alongside of us.
Yeah. How has the grief informed your writing? Because you've been a writer for a long time. You're an essayist. You've got beautiful work. You tell us about your writing history.
Okay, well, when I was in my 20s, I published my first book, and it was about graduating from college.
That's amazing. What was it called?
It was called Moving On. It was originally called Cramming for Life, which was a much better title.
That's a great title.
I know, the publisher changed it to Moving On.
Oh my God.
How to make the transition from college to the real world.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was a long time ago, and it was a very different publishing world then, but it was published by one of the big publishing houses, and that led to a lot of opportunities. So I got a Boston Globe column out of that, and
which is no joke. You
which
wrote
is no
for the
joke.
Boston Globe.
Yeah, it was
for how long? A long time.
A few years until I went into corporate.
Yeah.
Whole other story. I call it my 25-year corporate detour. Right. So anyway, but I was writing, more, and sometimes more, sometimes less. And it was actually with Dahlia's diagnosis that I wrote an essay that ended up in Huffington Post, and then wrote quite a bit from the PICU, et cetera. But
PICU, explain what that is.
Pediatric Intensive Care Unit.
Yeah.
And I was very comfortable with the essay form. I didn't know that I could do a memoir. And in fact, originally thought this will be a memoir in essays.
Right.
But it didn't want to be that. And so I learned about how to do memoir. And I feel like that's really what this story needed to be. What's interesting to your question about how does the grief play with the writing, one thing that I think it did for me was it allowed me to get some control of the situation. It allowed me to control the narrative a little bit. When you feel like everything's coming at you all the time and you're at its mercy, when you start writing the story, that gives you a little bit of control in a weird way. And then I also really wanted to bear witness to what was happening. Yeah. And again, feeling like this is so unique and so universal.
Totally. Isn't that interesting about memoir? They always say all the writing courses you'll ever take, the memoir courses always say the same thing. When you write very, very specifically about a topic, about your story, it becomes more universal.
It's so interesting. I was so lucky to have Joanna Rakoff, who wrote my Salinger year. She wrote the blurb on the cover of this book, and she read the advanced copy at her mother's bedside as her mother was dying. And I don't know her, but she called me and she said, I felt like you were holding my hand during this. And that to me is the universal nature of it. This was a loss that was the total opposite end of the spectrum.
Right.
And somehow she felt that we were together through this. So that universal nature of it is really interesting.
Do you think that Dahlia knew that you were writing your story while she was alive? Did you talk to her about it at all?
I don't think she did. And so just for people to know, most of the book was written at Dahlia's bedside, and the book was actually sold. I had an agent, and the book was sold while Dahlia was alive. So there's an epilogue. And you said to me early on, are you going to write an epilogue? What's going to happen?
You have to have that. I'm like, honey.
So it was never a book about Dahlia's death. It was very much a book about Dahlia's life.
Yeah.
I don't know if she knew at the time, but I choose to believe that she knows now.
Oh, I mean, yeah. So what is your favorite part of the book?
Well, I love that question. I think that weirdly, I love the fertility stuff. And I think it's because, well, you know why? I think people say, write from your scars, not your wounds. And it was so long ago, and it turned out how it was meant to turn out. So I just had fun with that part. And in fact, I wrote a lot more than is in the book. They had me cut 75% of that. No. Yeah, they were like, we need to get to Dahlia. I was like, but this part's good,
Right.
So I like that part. And then I think I like the parts where I got to kind of show the real character of like my mom, and then Dahlia's bat mitzvah, because that was such a, and obviously that's a culminating scene. But that was just so nourishing then when
Yeah.
it happened, and every time I get to revisit it, it still is.
Oh yeah, totally. All right. One of the things that really struck me about the book is you and your husband were trying so hard to be so strong for these other children, right? And for each other. And when you're in, any of us who have been caregivers, my sister and I helped both our parents as they were dying. You got shit to do.
You got shit to do.
You got to handle shit. There's so much to do. And you had the day jobs and all of it. And at one point, tell us the scene where your son comes to you and he needs you to show something else.
You know, it's really interesting because people will say to me, is there anything that you regret? Is there anything you would have done differently? And I feel really strongly that how we cared for Dahlia was the best we could. And I don't regret any of the decisions we made along the way. But there's one thing I regret, and I welcome the opportunity to talk about it because it's informed me even now as we're parenting two other children. And I think, you know, and so the situation was that without kind of coming to an agreement together, Rob and I just decided we were going to be really strong for all the kids, but particularly for the other two kids, because we wanted them to feel like we've got this. We didn't want them to have to own the worry and the fear and the anxiety.
Right.
We wanted them to know there are other people who've got this. And so we put on this strong front. And one evening, we were already in bed and our eldest came into the room and was just hysterical and said, there's something wrong with me. And I was like, oh God, what?
Yeah, what now?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And our eldest said to us, I'm so scared and I'm so angry and I pray and I pray and I pray and she's not getting better. But you guys are fine. What's wrong with me? And I thought, oh shit, we have messed
That's
up,
major.
you know? And, you know, it was one of those moments where, I don't know, maybe like we went through 8 boxes of tissues as we just sobbed and said, oh, you know, I just realized what we had done. And I try to look back and feel like we thought we were doing our best at the time, you know, but it was such an eye opener for us. And it's really informed me even today about being more open about, you know, things that I'm stressed about or feel anxious about with them so that they understand like this is all okay.
Well, because don't you think kids are so tuned into
Oh,
their
they're
parents?
so
They're so
tuned
psychic.
in.
And if you're lying to them, they know it.
They know it. And in fact, Dahlia's pediatrician, who was also the pediatrician for our other two kids, would say to us, not infrequently, so listen, I thought I'd come over and unpack things for the other kids. And I was like, we don't need to unpack anything. We are keeping this packed up, you know, and over and over. And it was clear he knew they need to have this conversation. And it took us until that evening for us to realize, and it changed things for us. It really did. You know, you think about, obviously, a memoir has many transformations in it, and most of them have to be condensed down to a scene, even though they're something that happened over time. That really was that night things changed.
Oh, I'm sure. How are we doing on time? I know that they wanted us to start questions at.
Okay.
Yeah.
Questions.
I have one more really quick question. Time management, sister. Tell for those of us who are like wrestling with time management.
Yeah.
Got any tips?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, so time management. So first of all, I mean, like I've always kind of excelled at that.
I know.
Right? So
I know.
yeah. So I'm lucky.
Time dinner. Here.
I'm lucky in that respect. But I think that it was a matter of being super organized, having a lot of great help that we did have. And, you know, like we said at the beginning.
And you had to fight for that help. Like
there was a lot of advocacy, learned how to really find my voice in that respect.
Yeah.
And I think having little goals along the way, particularly as it pertained to the writing. Another thing is that Rob and I gave each other a night off during the week, something that I advise.
I love it because you looked forward to it. You knew, like,
oh
okay, I'm in hell now.
Thursday night. Yes. And so, you know, being able, and I think about people who don't have a partner when they're going through, you know, and so we were very lucky in that respect as well.
And date nights on Saturday.
Okay, date nights.
Ridiculous.
So important. And, you know, we prioritized that. We needed to have 2 caregivers in the house in order for us to go on a date. And we did it. And every single week we'd get in the car and we'd be like, we've never needed a date more.
Oh, yeah.
And then the next week we'd be like, we've never dated. And because that we literally felt that way every single week. But it was really important to stay, you know, to have that time away. And by the way, like I said at the beginning, we came from Boston. This is the first time in over 20 years
I know.
that we have gotten on a plane, just the two
You
of
guys
us.
look
and
so happy.
Yeah.
And you should tell them you retired from your job.
Oh, yes. And I left my
That's like good news.
it is good news. May 1st I left my corporate job of 26 years. So, yeah.
Like if anybody deserves to not have an alarm clock,
Yeah.
it's this one. Does anybody have any
Yes, please.
questions at all? No? We answered everything. I know we're so good at what we do. Yes.
Did obviously we're so cracked open by all the losses and the enormity of what your family was going through. Do you feel like that helped your life?
Great question.
It's such a good question. I feel like I had to really learn how to be very open. Look, nobody wants to read it. There's no point in writing a book if you're going to keep it to yourself. You've got to become open about it.
Yeah.
And that was something that really I grew into over the years. The first big loss I had was the sudden death of my sister when I was 27. And that changed things for me so dramatically. In the book, I write that I was living in a bubble before that, and that punctured the bubble. Then I started to see the world through the puncture, right? And it changed things. And I think it's been a process, but I've definitely had to become much more open and sharing it, because really I've also come to realize that people can show up when you're open about what you're going through. If you keep it all to yourself, then you're just more isolated. But when you can start to share a little bit, people can be there for you. It's like, it's good for you, it's good for them. So
Yeah.
yes.
I just didn't want to be the first question. Too much pressure. I was lucky enough to read Advanced Copy, and the thing that I love that you did is, in telling your story, you were honest, but you did not make yourself the hero of the story, and you had flaws as a parent that I saw in the writing, and I kept thinking, I don't want to have to live up to Jesse reading this book. I wanted to connect, and I did.
But you did tell me, Rob.
Well, I fell in love with Rob all over again.
Seriously.
I liked him from the get-go, but how you can't, I mean, he actually is.
He's the hero, right? But yeah.
But was there a part in writing that was particularly cathartic for you in telling this story that helped you sort of process or get more in touch with grief, or in any way sort of make you really feel in a different way, having put it on paper?
Absolutely, and thank you for asking. And it continues, because I now write quite a bit about grief. I have a column in Psychology Today called Grace in Grief, and I also talk about it a lot on my podcast, which is called I Don't Know How You Do It. So these conversations have helped me quite a bit. But in terms of the writing, I think being able to share certain pieces that I felt were misconceptions was really useful for me. So for example, because our children are adopted and don't look like us, they're from Guatemala, there was, I feel like, a real misunderstanding that people would see us and see Dahlia, who was in the end so visibly disabled with a wheelchair and trach and braces and goggles and hearing aids, and and think, oh, look at these people, they went and adopted a child with all these, and I was like, no, that's not the case. And so being able to share kind of the truth that, no, I would never have signed up for this. I wouldn't have, And so,
right. I mean,
And I thank God that we didn't know, because we understand powerfully that we were meant to be with Dahlia and she was meant to be with us, but we never would have signed up for it.
Yeah.
So things like that, it was, weirdly cathartic for me to be able to say, like, no, here's the real story.
I'm wondering how old your other kids are and how they're doing.
Yeah. So we have our little guy is 17 now, which is a whole other thing. When I had this experience when I lost my sister, when I became her age.
Oh, wow.
And so Theo's 17 now, and JoJo's 22. And I will say this, they are incredibly, incredibly understanding, kind, generous human beings. And I imagine that some of that, at least, is due to the fact that they grew up as Dahlia's sibling. Maybe they would have turned out that way anyway.
Yeah.
And their grief is a journey just like anybody's, and very different from each other and different from ours. And it's not easy. It's complicated.
How was your experience in Guatemala?
Oh,
Yeah,
well,
I know it's your favorite topic.
yes. Well, no, thank you for asking, because that was the other thing that they had me cut the most of. It was the Guatemala and it was the
right,
fertility. And we
right.
went to Guatemala 5 times. And what was so interesting about it was from visit 1 to visit 5, how the political situation changed so dramatically and what the impact was on us in terms of doing really the same thing, going to deal with the court system and the foster care system and the attorneys to adopt a child. But it was radically different. When we went to adopt our first, we traveled around a little bit and really got to see part of the country. Fast forward, when we were there with Dahlia, we weren't really supposed to go out. And in fact, what I did was I put her in one of those, what do they call them? Bjorn. And I had a poncho I'd put over it. So that it was kind of like I was hiding that we had a baby, but with Theo, and this was all within the course of 4 years, with Theo, we weren't allowed to ever leave the hotel. And so it was the change there. But we are now in the beginning planning phases of a trip to Guatemala, where we will be going back for the first time with them.
Oh, nice.
And with our friend Cara, who's going to officially serve as our translator.
Really?
I need to brush up on my Spanish.
That's magical.
Yes, Colin.
Jess, I just had a question about your process, because I'm just so curious. I mean, you mentioned you're the queen of time management, but still, like, how long did it take? And did you have any moments of extreme doubt where you just were like, I'm shelving this?
Yes, it was in the drawer.
Oh
it was
my
in the
God, I
drawer,
love
for
the box.
sure.
You're like, box.
Oh,
Put it in
that
a
was
box.
a whole other thing. That was that. Yeah, that's actually a chapter that I really like about when there's just stuff you can't deal with at the moment. You put it in a box. But with this, it's funny. So I wrote the thing, and I thought it was going to be a memoir and essays. This is before I even met you, and I was like, oh, this is so good, and it's ready, and I'm going to send it to the agents. And it was so bad.
Famous last word.
Right. And I picked like the 2 biggest agents, and I sent it to them, and they were like, oh, send us the chapters, and I did, and they both passed. As well they should have. It was not good.
Yeah.
But 2 agents, and I was like, oh, that's it. It's not meant to be. It's done. It's going in the drawer.
That happens so often.
I was like,
it's so
that's
sad.
it. And of course, Rob's just like, because knew that it was coming out of the drawer at some point. And I don't remember how much time passed, maybe a year. And I was then, okay, it's time. This is going to happen. And then it was, a lot of, okay, I am writing a book, not I want to write a book. I think there's a real difference in how you kind of begin to talk to yourself about it, right?
Yeah, oh yeah.
I'm writing a book. I'm investing in this process. I'm investing and going to meet people who are writers. And, there was a lot to that, and something I'm really, happy to talk about more, because I feel like from where I was at the beginning, and it was so naive too, and it was.
Everyone's so naive. I mean, this book, my book is called Beautiful Writers. It's a story about me having a dream to be a writer and thinking, oh, I'm going to be on Oprah in 6 months. Like, no problem. I mean, but I was so grandiose.
Yes.
And I think that's normal. I think to carry something that long, that's that difficult, because writing a book is hard.
Yeah.
It's so hard, and there's so many layers to it. And in order to do that, you have to start off with a certain amount of grandiosity. You just have to think that you got great shit to say.
Right.
And then over time, and what I noticed in my story and so many of the people that I've interviewed for my podcast, it's like spirit gives you that idea, or the muse, or your higher self, whatever it is, you get the idea, and it's very real, and it just makes you so alive. And that early momentum, the synchronicities that happen, that carries you. And I think it's meant to carry you. It just gets you so excited. You get it, you have it long enough that when the messy middle starts becoming really real, fortunately, you've had enough joy and enough passion and enough good things happen and enough little wins along the way that you go, okay, I'm going to stick with it, right? And
Yes.
you do. And it's hard for everybody and all of us, like cut 100 words here and cut 1,000,000 words here and start over 12 times here. And that's what the best writers do. It's mastery takes time.
And that was something, this whole idea of like going back to it and refining and editing was really different for me, because in an essay, it's like, oh yeah, sure, 900 words. Yeah. You don't think about it.
Yeah.
And this was, no, you got to go back again,
it's
again.
painstaking.
And that,
Yeah.
I wasn't happy about that.
Correct.
And then, but I saw it got better each time. And
It
that
gets so much better.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've worked on manuscripts sometimes for years and years and years, and I'll send them to my sister, who's one of the best editors I've ever met. And she was like, Linda, I'm your family and you're writing about me and I don't even care. And you're like, I'm like, oh God, okay. And but then it's so joyous when I work on it a million hours, send it back to her and she goes, you nailed it.
Oh.
And it's like, right?
Yes.
Worth it.
And that's the question I kept asking myself. Why would somebody who doesn't know me care about this story?
Right.
Because I was never writing it. I from the beginning felt like this is a book that I want to get published in a traditional publishing fashion. It was not, I'm going to write this and then we'll see what happens.
Right. And that's okay too, for the people that want to write for their their heart,
totally,
right?
yeah.
But I do think, because you are a pro, I mean, you had that column for a long time, and you come from a lineage of writing, so I don't think it's possible for you to have a story this big and not know that it needs to go to a wider audience. But for those of you who just want to write, that's okay too. It's all okay. Any other questions before we sign? Christine.
Are you going to write another book, or is your column and your podcast your thing now? Like,
Great question.
Yes, thank you. Yes, no, I've already been taught. I've had some conversations with the agent, and yes, I have some ideas for.
Are you still with Michelle?
Yes. And so I have some ideas, and I'm not quite sure. I'm trying to kind of be quiet and listen to what story wants to be told, right? But I won't be quiet for too long, because I'm So yeah,
I was listening the other day. Nicole Kidman was talking with Reese Witherspoon, and it was a really good conversation about, if you have an idea and you hold it, you can kind of hold the energy. But if you speak about it, it's almost like your unconscious thinks you've already created it in the world. So you don't get the same dopamine hits as if you hold it, because you're getting the dopamine hits talking with people about it. And then you can lose your motivation because you already feel on some level that you've accomplished it. That was a good warning for me. I was like, oh, zip. All right. Anything else before we sign? Thank you for coming.
Thank
guys.
you.
So
Thank
fun.
you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dahlia.
Thank you very
So
much.
fun.
If you haven't already, we have plenty of copies up front to purchase, and then we'll get some trophies for you all.
Sounds
the
good.
time.
Excellent.
Yeah, so
Thank
good.
you. Do we just do here?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I don't know if I have my pen.
I have a special purple Sharpie.
Yeah.